You know, I got a brother.
What? That's insane, Tommy.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's a half-brother, but he got a son. I'm my actual uncle now. Feel like I keep losing my peoples. JP! Come on, JP!
Now, we went into episode 8 knowing the bloodbath was about to begin, because of the foundation that they laid in previous episodes. We expected some characters to be taken off the chessboard, but for Tommy to really sink to his knees, there were only ever a handful of characters that would put him in a position that we have seen a few times dating back to power. For example, Holly Weaver, Lakeisha, and also Ghost, and now we can also add JP to the list. It was a crazy moment at the end of episode 8 which sunk Tommy to his knees, which will no doubt set up an all-out war between Tommy and CBI. Just like Shanti mentioned, Chicago is about to see a war and a bloodbath like they've never seen before. Tommy, along with his right-hand man D-Mac, with the addition of Shanti and Miguel, will be cancelling Christmas. You can be damn sure about that. But in this episode, which raised the bar once again for Power Book 4 Force, we also saw law enforcement on the hunt in the form of Bobby DeFranco. He wants revenge for Stacy Marks' death. But you still also have AUSA Seng working the angle for the Marquez cartel. Tommy was also trying to build back better, all while protecting Maria, which ended with him being in a team of Shanti and Miguel. The CBI are also in self-destruction mode, and I do expect that to continue with big consequences for both Janard and Diamond in episode 9. So as usual, stick with this video right through to the very end, because there's a lot to unpack as we run through all the key clues, conversations, and moments from an insane Power Book 4 Force Season 3, Episode 8. Now, this episode kicks off with Bobby DeFranco entering the crime scene of Stacy Marks' death. Tommy certainly had one hell of an evening towards the end of episode 7. He was kicked out of CBI, and shortly afterwards, he met Stacy Marks, who said she was done being under his thumb. She was trying to arrest him for Claudia's murder, but in that moment, when she went for her handcuffs, he went for his gun, and Tommy cancelled Stacy Marks' Christmas. So we had Bobby DeFranco come into the crime scene, and honestly, he just couldn't believe it. He was absolutely devastated. He was going through his things with Stacy Marks from earlier on this season, but this was still his wife. Now, in that moment, he also noticed the phone under Stacy Marks' car. It was the burner phone that Tommy gave to her in episode 5, and messages from Pageant Inc., aka Tommy Egan. There was also only one number in the phone. He was just about to dial it, and we all know who would have been on the other end: Tommy. He sure did have one hell of an evening the night before. He was telling Maria that him and his operation took a big hit yesterday, and he wanted to deal with it another way, but he couldn't, which was him alluding to Stacy Marks. And did he have another choice not to kill Stacy Marks? I do think he did what he had to do in that particular moment. The minute she stopped working for him and when she tried to arrest him for Claudia Flynn's murder, this partnership only ever worked for a brief period because Stacy Marks reluctantly helped Tommy, and when she refused, it was done. But killing a US attorney, that's huge, and he did warn Maria about the feds being in their business going forward. He also got into a fight with Diamond. You could see all the bruises and marks around his neck and shoulder area, but you could really tell he was fuming. He couldn't believe that he was kicked out of something that was his, something that he basically built, and he was in the mindset of burning the coalition down to the ground. However, this is one of the reasons why Tommy loves Maria. She mentioned don't burn it down to the ground, take it back. She even mentioned Miguel could perhaps help, which Tommy did seem like he wasn't too keen on because we all know the history between Tommy and Miguel, but in that moment, in came the call from Bobby DeFranco from Stacy Marks' burner. Bobby DeFranco knew it was Tommy because towards the end of episode 7, Stacy Marks did tell him that she was compromised. She did allude to it being Tommy, but she would deal with the problem on her own. There was a brief moment of silence, but then you just heard it in the tone of Bobby DeFranco's voice. He wasn't going to stop coming for Tommy. So going forward, welcome to the cat and mouse game between Tommy and Bobby DeFranco. Now, in terms of his business, he did have a plan for his next move. It was meeting with Che, and as we know, connects always get the details from the streets. He even mentioned the city was hot because someone took out a US attorney, with Tommy being classic Tommy. He also mentioned he knew about him being thrown out of CBI, which was no surprise. Tommy should know Connects find out everything. That's why Ghost wanted to make sure he was honest about their operation being hit early on in season 1 of Power, because Felipe Lobos already knew. However, Tommy was here to do business with Che. He still had the same amount of money to continue business as usual with the same amount of product, but Che was only giving him 24 hours to move the product and then re-up, because he doesn't deal in bodega money, he deals in Amazon money, and if not, he'd wipe out his entire family tree. So Tommy was definitely on the clock here in episode 8, already suffering an early setback. That was with Ashur, who leads the Assyrians. That was Janard and Diamond making their moves to make sure the coalition was airtight. They were taking all the proper precautions because Diamond knew that Tommy would come for some of their crews. He knows how Tommy works because he's been in business with him and he's seen the way he moves for now 2 seasons. They had to keep the coalition on lock. The next step was to make a move with the RDs, make sure they were still on board, which is where Diamond asked Janard to take Shanti with him because they needed to show a united front and they were the dream team. But Janard kept the fact that her and Shanti were done at this moment in time because of the events back in episode 7. It does also have to be said Diamond was back on his Double D ship, Drunk Diamond. He was drinking again in episode 8 just like he was in episode 7, and you could definitely tell with the way he was speaking and the way he was moving. This is the old Diamond, very reckless. Now Janard did try and patch things up with Shanti later on. He mentioned that Tommy stitched him up, which he definitely did. Tommy had him on strings in episode 7. But Tommy wasn't the one who put a needle back him in season 2, and he wasn't the one who got jumped from behind by Jade. They were all Janard's choices. And back in season 2, Shanti did also warn him one more hiccup with the drugs after she helped him to get clean, she was gone. So she definitely did give him enough chances. She was out of CBI's coalition and she was focused on her own hustle. But it was also going to be great to watch him fall. That was according to Shanti. Now something that will also be the downfall of Janard and Diamond is Raheem. We've been speaking about Raheem over the past couple of weeks because of a particular conversation back in episode 4. So let's give ourselves a bit of a reminder.
And whoever's with me is with me, and whoever falls short is my enemy. Where you at?
Always bet on black. Excellence and beauty.
Raheem was always loyal to Shanti. He had a big bag of cash from a side hustle from investments, and this is what he was doing with Shanti here, investing. But also because you could probably tell that he liked Shanti as well, and that's exactly what Shanti played on. She's a very smart woman, tough, fierce, and she definitely knows how to get what she wants. Having Raheem inside CBI is the perfect position for him at this moment in time, and also perfect for Shanti, because he can find out all the weaknesses that Shanti can then target. For example, Kendra, she was refusing to run fentanyl for Diamond through the prison system, and that's something that they could definitely work with, but they were still missing one key ingredient, a connect, and that's where Tommy came in. However, just before we come to Tommy and Shanti's partnership, where were law enforcement as things currently stood? AUSA Seng was now the acting US attorney after Stacy Marks' death, and their number one priority at this moment in time was to find out who was behind Stacy Marks' murder. It didn't have the signs of it being a cartel hit. They didn't believe it was the Marquez cartel. If it was, I'm sure they would have been happy to claim the murder with a signature, which is where Bobby DeFranco chimed in. He mentioned that he wanted to focus all his energy on Tommy Egan. Initially he said it was a hunch, but then he pulled out the burner phone that he found at the crime scene. The problem with bringing this information to AUSA Seng is he has no idea who Seng is working for either, and that's the Marquez cartel. But Bobby DeFranco isn't to know that. He's now given him the information that Tommy was the one who got to Stacy. Now someone who would have been caught in the middle would have been also Vic Flynn, and that was law enforcement's next move, Vic the Snitch. It was clear to see that Vic and Ray had clear plans to leave. He's already set up a new spot somewhere far away from Chicago. She was also about to quit being the assistant to Donna Jackson from the DNC, which is when she got the news about Stacy Marks' murder from last night. Now she knew Vic had nothing to do with it because Vic was with her last night, so he had an alibi. But straight away he thought, Tommy Egan. We then had Bobby DeFranco and AUSA Seng ringing Vic and mentioning they're going to come to get him. Bobby DeFranco told him that he believes it was Tommy, and his sources from the street have also told him that he split from CBI. He's a lone wolf. We all know from season 2, Bobby DeFranco does enjoy being in the field, and he does have a way of getting information from those in the streets. So you'd have to assume that he's done his homework. People have been talking about the split at the top of CBI's hierarchy, and that would have then been fed to Bobby DeFranco. But you could tell that Vic was very shook. He doesn't trust law enforcement because all they've constantly been doing for the best part of a season and a half is basically move the goalposts. In his mind, he was thinking, Tommy may be unpredictable, but this is probably the most opportunistic moment to get out from under Tommy's thumb. He's no longer backed by the coalition, he's a lone wolf, he's not just killed a US attorney, he's the most vulnerable he's ever been since he got to Chicago.
Is free will an illusion? Do we make our own decisions? Or are they preordained?
Now freedom, does it exist? For majority of the entire season, Vic has always been under someone else's thumb, not just in seasons 3 or 2, even dating all the way back to season 1. Walter Flynn always tried to control both Claudia and Vic with their positions and their roles, just like Monet tried to do with Drew, Diana, Kane, and also Zeke. Free will, it's just an illusion. But he finally thought this was his moment to finally be free. Now with Bobby DeFranco and AUSA Seng, they knew Vic was spooked, but they also decided to start bringing down the hammer on Tommy Egan as well. Tommy was under all sorts of pressure in episode 8, and you could definitely tell. The puff of the cheeks, time was ticking, he had to move product for Che in 24 hours, and then he also had this. He definitely sure does live and die by the gun. And this is the trouble that comes with that life. Law enforcement barricading his home. We have to remember he killed a US attorney of Chicago, so law enforcement were going to be out in force, pun intended. Now they did also target JP, law enforcement came in, handcuffed him for an hour, and ransacked his home too. The feds were turning up the heat because they lost one of their own. He also told JP that they were at the CBI, DMAC was too, which is also where he made DMAC his number 2. He had a hell of a lot of product to move by the end of the day. He gave DMAC 3 keys to move and told him to get Marshall back on board, who we are going to come to in just a moment. But this is where they came clean to JP around how Jannard tried to have him killed once again. But Tommy held it down, held his back and dealt with Diamond, which you could see with Tommy's kind of facial reaction he wasn't too sure of, because we all saw what happened. But JP certainly wasn't happy, because Jannard coming for DMAC isn't the first time. Jannard also shot DMAC way back in season 1, and that's not something that JP's forgotten. Remember, they did also come face to face back in season 1 right towards the end. But Tommy did warn JP, do not go after Jannard. The streets were hot as it is with cops because of what Tommy did. His relationship with CBI is also non-existent. They were basically at war. The last thing he needed was JP to get himself caught in the middle, just like he did back in season 1 when he was kidnapped. Now in terms of business, we had DMAC coming to Marshall's apartment and telling him that they needed to get to work. But when he heard it was for Tommy and not for CBI, he was out. Marshall wanted to stick with CBI even though Tommy was building his own organization. And I'm not gonna lie, I am quite disappointed with Marshall. Earlier this week, we actually spoke about the situation between DMAC and Marshall's relationship, and I mentioned how Marshall should probably feel the same way about Jannard as DMAC. Even though their intended target was DMAC, they sent them all into an ambush with the 9/7s, which Marshall would have been a part of too. Jannard didn't care who got caught in the crossfire, and if that meant Marshall died in the process, so be it. I personally thought Marshall would have backed his boy because of that particular reason, but he didn't. He wanted to stick with CBI now that Jannard's taken Tommy's position back at the top of the hierarchy. Things have gone back to the way it was, which isn't a good thing. We've spoken about Junkie Jannard and Drunk Diamond, Double J, Double D, how they're going to be contributing towards their own downfall of CBI, more so after what they did in episode 8. But this then ended up with DMAC being kicked out of Marshall's apartment. Now with DMAC, we know he started to slowly rebuild this relationship with JP. We saw the love between them in episode 7, we saw the happy dinner scene between him, JP, and Genesis. We saw DMAC in Smiles in episode 7 as well, where he called Kate, which definitely should have been the warning. If you're someone who went straight into watching this season without the clues and the hints from the official trailer of the funeral scene, what we saw in episode 7 and what we saw again from the beginning of episode 8 when JP said he'd love to have him back home, the warm embrace and the love between them, that should have been the warning to tell you that they were about to rip this away, which no doubt is just going to add to DMAC's heartbreak. They were just getting back on the right track, but honestly really typical of Power. They recently did it with Monet and Diana in Power Book 2 Ghost, same thing here. Now we know DMAC was given 3 keys to move, but with Tommy he had to deal with the rest, and this is where he came to see Shanti Showstopper. Knowing the situation between Shanti and CBI, Tommy gave her an invitation to join his organization. He's got the connecting Che and also the product, meanwhile Shanti has the people and territory, because let's remember, she does run Garfield Park. Seemed like the perfect combination because all of a sudden, both of their interests do seem to align. She also asked Tommy whether he had a direct link to Kendra because she had an inside source who told her she's not messing with Diamond's fentanyl. Her and Diamond have had a falling out, maybe they could make a move with Kendra and Rojas, which was music to Tommy's ears. And Tommy was kind of impressed with the way she knew about their business. He could tell that Shanti had been doing her homework, but definitely still respects the hustle. However, even with Shanti on board, even with Kendra on board at this moment in time, they were still 2 or 3 crews light if they really wanted to make a dent with this product, which is where they made a move for the Albanians. Now initially Peter wasn't happy with what happened back in episode 6, he lost a lot of men and it seemed like he'd already made his mind up, he was done doing business with Tommy until Shanti stepped in. She said that she's got a unique set of skills which she's shown with the Viagra Triangle clubs, she can help scale organizations, and the way Peter's organization has taken a hit, that's exactly what she can help with. And again, you could tell Tommy was very impressed. As I mentioned before, Gary Lennon did tease that Shanti doesn't fill the Liliana void by any stretch, but Tommy does respect her hustle and what she's capable of, which is why Diamond wanted to make sure Shanti was by Jannard's side when he met with the RDs. Tommy also sweetened the deal by making it a 2-for-1 to compensate for his losses, which was definitely an offer too good to turn down for Peter. Now for those who aren't on X, I did also post this earlier in the week. My next bold prediction, Tommy and Shanti to take over Chicago, remove Jannard and Diamond, Shanti to take control over CBI and the city as he attempts to go operational multi-city, which then transitions us into Power Legacy. And it definitely does look like that could potentially be a possibility after watching episode 8. However, I do still think we need to keep in mind who Shanti is and what she's done before. Again, in episode 8, we saw her plant the seed of doubt in Diamond's mind when he tried to warn Shanti against working with Tommy. She flipped that back on Diamond and mentioned Jannard wanted to kill him from day one. That's the only reason he was back in CBI. In episode 7, we mentioned that Shanti's let a lot of secrets spill, information is power, and that's exactly what she did again here. She's very crafty and strategic, so we definitely do need to keep it in mind when she does get her meet with Che, could she still stab Tommy in his back again? Definitely is something I do think we need to keep in mind. Now, speaking of Jannard meeting with the RDs, these were the former Treason members that flipped over to the RDs back in season 2. We saw a big fallout early on with Jannard's organization after it was revealed that Jannard killed Little K, and that's something that they haven't forgotten. So there was already some underlying tension and history here, which is why he needed to have Shanti by his side. Not only would she have dealt with this disrespect and tension, she would have also kept Jannard straight, who definitely is back to being Junkie Jannard, Double J. Now Raheem also saw and heard everything that went down between Jannard and the RDs. No doubt that's something that will also be reported back to Shanti. These are the weaknesses and cracks within CBI that will no doubt help Shanti and Tommy break the coalition from within, which I do think Jannard and Diamond are doing a great job themselves anyway. As expected, they are destroying it themselves. Now after this meet, we also had Jannard who could barely walk down a couple of steps. Junkie Jannard was high as hell, and that's where JP came for him and put him on the floor. JP beat the brakes out of Jannard, and he couldn't even retaliate because he was so high. Again, I'm sure this will also be reported back to Shanti. Now we then had Maria attending to JP's bruises on his knuckles. Tommy originally told him not to go for JP, but I do think this was brewing ever since season 1 when Jannard shot D-Mac. We then had Tommy mention he was going to post a couple of Albanians outside just for JP's protection. Maria also let it slip they were having a baby, which again was another happy moment and brought more smiles, which will soon turn to heartbreak. In terms of their business, D-Mac was also only able to sell a bit of their product because Marshall was sticking with CBI, which is where Maria reminded Tommy he can still team up with Miguel. Again, at this moment in time, Tommy was very hesitant to do so because of their past and history, but things were about to change because of what happened next. We had the world's worst hitter in power history coming for Maria, which was on her way to work. We knew he was going to come for Maria at some point because Ortega did give the order to kill Maria back in episode 7, but to add to the fact that he ran from Miguel in episode 7, he couldn't even deal with Maria and shoot straight. They really don't make them like pink sneakers anymore, do they? It also took him a hell of a long time to pull the trigger when he had the gun up to Maria right here, where she ran him over again and again and again. Now, while this was going down, Tommy actually got jumped by Vic. Vic knew that Tommy would go for the coalition and post a cruise like before. Tommy mentioned, why didn't Vic just take the money and get out of town just like his Aunt Beth? But we know why Vic stayed. He wanted to catch Tommy at his most vulnerable moment, which he did. He finally got the upper hand on Tommy. But here's where he made a huge mistake. Some of you guys may have heard the term Bond villain stupidity, when someone has their enemy completely defenseless, captured, or at gunpoint or cornered, but instead of finishing them off quickly, they taunt or toy with them. And that was Vic's mistake here, because he not only lost his opportunity when Bobby DeFranco came in, I do think he may also pay the price either in episode 9 or 10. Now, Bobby DeFranco finally came face to face with Stacy Marks' killer. He knew it was Tommy, he just couldn't prove it yet. But with Tommy, we know he's cold as ice. He's never been afraid of law enforcement, he's always been one step ahead of them, especially since he came to Chicago. But you could definitely tell from Bobby DeFranco, he had that fire in his eyes, you could hear it in the tone of his voice. He wanted Tommy to pay, and he made him a promise that he was going to come back for him, and also put him in prison. Now, it was then getting bad to worse for Tommy because this is when he got the call from Maria. She was shell-shocked with what just happened with Titus. Adrenaline took over for a moment, but she was in such a state of shock, she could barely move. Now, Tommy's first thought was to make sure that she was okay and the baby was also okay, but to also clean up this mess. He mentioned he was running out of people that he could trust to handle something like this, which is when Maria told him to basically stop being stubborn, call Miguel. Although it does also kind of make you think with what Tommy just said, he's running out of people that he can trust, and with this new partnership of Tommy, Miguel and Shanti, if Miguel does die, if Shanti does end up stabbing him in his back, that's something that definitely would give Tommy no choice but to call Tariq. So definitely just some food for thought. But thankfully both Maria and the baby were fine. Now, as Miguel walked in, he mentioned the crime scene is now clean, and it was the same hitter that came for him in episode 7. It was the Marquez cartel. And just like Maria mentioned, just like we've been saying over the past 2 weeks, they have a lot more in common than just Maria and the baby. The Marquez cartel is another. Whether they like it or not, it is in their best interest to work together. Now, on the Marquez cartel, we did also have Shen coming to see AUSA Seng. He basically told him his time was up. But well and truly, AUSA Seng was in the best position he's ever been to make things happen for the Marquez cartel. Stacy Marks is now dead, he's now the acting US attorney, he's also got dirt on Stacy Marks, which is something else we also spoke about earlier this week. Would dirt be thrown on Stacy Marks' name? I do think that is still possible. But he can also do things for the Marquez cartel that he couldn't before, which is have this RICO case thrown out and also get Roberto Ortega released tomorrow. So that's happening soon. And I do expect that to add to a long list of problems for Tommy inside episode 9. He's going to have enemies coming for him from every single direction, just like Joseph Sikora teased. Now, speaking of enemies, let's talk about CBI and the events that led up to not just JP's death, but also King Kilo and Jojo. Diamond mentioned he wasn't happy that Jannard got his ass handed to him in the streets, but Double J said that is fine because the only person who saw it was Raheem, and Raheem was loyal, which we know isn't the case. He's someone who's loyal to Shanti, not Double J. This is also where we had Kendra come in and tell him that she was done. With King Kilo's release, which was also mentioned earlier on in the episode with the meeting with the RDs, the prison was basically hers, and she was now deciding to team with Tommy and Shanti. However, in a rage, a drunk Diamond killed Kendra, another reckless move in killing a CO, which could very well come back to haunt him. We've been speaking about how Diamond's story arc could end up with him being put back in prison. You also have to think him telling Jannard to clean this mess up. Who did Double J call? Who did he just say was loyal? Raheem. Now again, if Raheem feeds this back to Shanti and tells Shanti, Diamond killed a CO and you can find the body here because they asked me to clean it up, if they really wanted to get rid of Diamond, that's how they can get rid of Diamond. So that's just something to keep in mind. Raheem will be giving more information to Shanti, and this definitely could potentially be another. But honestly, this was just Jannard and Diamond destroying CBI themselves, just like we thought. They were both liabilities, and then going to King Kilo and now switching up the story again, that just made things worse. Their intentions was to set King Kilo on D-Mac and Tommy. He told King Kilo that D-Mac was Tommy's nephew and Tommy was the one protecting him this entire time. D-Mac was the one who actually killed Mad Dog back in season 2, which ended up with King Kilo wanting Jannard dead until he mentioned he could take them to D-Mac. Now, on the other side of Chicago, Maria told Miguel again, he knows what he needs to do. They are on the same side. Because of Maria, they need to make sure they both protect their family. Earlier on, she also mentioned the same to Miguel. She mentioned it's not about the size of the dog in the fight, it's about the fight in the dog. And Tommy definitely isn't just any ordinary lone wolf. Just like everybody keeps saying in Chicago, it's Tommy fucking Egan. Now, they were never gonna just go from being enemies to working happily together because they were in one hell of a mess themselves. Kendra was also killed, so they lost another way to move their product, but they did also quickly come to the realization they had to work together, and Shanti had the solution, which did come with a price, a meet with Che. She was giving Tommy territory, soldiers, and cash, so the least Tommy could do is give her a meet with the Connect, and in that moment, he really did have no choice. He was on the clock and he was running out of options, and this was his only one. Now, as the night was beginning to come to an end, there was an eerie silence. The streets were way too quiet, but that was all about to change. Jannard, King Kilo, and Jojo killed the Albanian bodyguards that were posted up at JP's house and put him at gunpoint. They wanted D-Mac, which they couldn't find in JP's phone because the name was actually under Darnell Gibbs. If they actually used a couple of brain cells, then maybe they would have been able to figure it out. But instead, King Kilo then decided to call Tommy, which is when JP screamed, "They're after D-Mac." King Kilo did mention he was happy to give him his brother, but he would have to serve up his nephew, which is when JP made another very smart move. He knew his time was up and he did have to protect his son, as he was saying across episode 8, protecting D-Mac. But before he did, again, he screamed to make sure Tommy heard him loud and clear. This was all because he whooped Jannard, be a man and kill him himself. He said that to make sure Tommy heard exactly who was here and who would be behind it, which is when we saw Jannard pull the trigger, 2 in his chest and 1 straight to the head. And there goes JP, which then sunk Tommy to his knees. This was the moment Gary Lennon was talking about Pride Season 3, when he said there would be a moment that would bring Tommy to his knees, and he honestly couldn't believe it. He wanted JP to fight, he wanted him to fight back, he was screaming down the phone, "Come on JP," but he was asking way too much with him being surrounded by Jannard, King Kilo, and also Jojo. It was really a heartbreaking moment with Shanti and Miguel also watching on in the background, with all of them basically helpless. However, the episode didn't end here. They then flipped back to JP's house where King Kilo mentioned he was done with Jannard and Diamond playing games. The RDs were at the coalition, and in a crazy moment, Jannard then went and pulled the trigger on King Kilo and Jojo too. He absolutely emptied his clip, which is the result of him being high and not in control. We have been saying Jannard and Diamond would destroy CBI themselves, and that's exactly what they were doing in episode 8. CBI will cease to exist because the RDs will want answers, there's going to be a huge tear within the coalition, and as we all know, chaos does create opportunities. So there is a chance we will see a new king, or should we say maybe even a queen, in Chicago. Junkie Jannard's fate will no doubt be sealed after he pulled the trigger on JP, and for Diamond, I do think one of these kills will end up coming back to haunt him, which sends him back to prison, and Raheem could very well continue to play a role in that. But the war and the onslaught starts from here. Tommy will definitely want revenge, D-Mac will also want revenge, and if you guys thought this was a bloodbath in episode 8, we're definitely going to be in for a treat in episode 9 and 10, because you can be damn sure Tommy will be cancelling Christmas. With that being said, that's a wrap for all things episode 8, a crazy action-packed episode with so many moving chess pieces. Again, Power Book 4 Force just seems to keep leveling up, which really does actually get me excited for Legacy as well. But get all your thoughts down below in the comment section. I know you guys have a lot of talking points for this one, so drop them down below in the comment section. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.